Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Thursday, February 26th. So I'm going to cover a couple of anomalies or perhaps discontinuities in the sense of a change in the geometry regarding the geopolitical situation that are openings for us to organize the principles and idea content for what has to be the direction of humanity. So that's how we should look at these. But what I'll be referring to and covering in a minute more in depth is on some of the voices of the military-industrial complex who are getting cold feet concerning a strike on Iran. Now, the other change in the situation is a recent very high-level delegation by German business leaders led by the Chancellor Friedrich Merz to China in discussions on economic collaboration between Germany and China. So that's a change given the belligerent stance that the Germans have generally taken towards China in the recent period. But before I come to that, just a brief review of where we stand on the current geometry, the trajectory that we have of global Britain's war against the BRICS, and mainly against Russia and China that are the leading opposition in terms of any sort of strategic bulwark strategically against the agenda of global Britain, which is, of course, to restore the neo-colonial agenda or keep alive their colonial agenda. So now, I just want to note one thing on the U.S. apparently being on the verge of striking Iran. We do have the negotiations that will be happening in Geneva. Many people, of course, see these as just a sham and simply, just part of the overall tactics of the inevitability of a strike against Iran, such as what happened in the run-up to the last Midnight Hammer and the 12-Day War and so on that we saw last summer, where similar negotiations were taking place. But regarding that, we did have the State of the Union address from Trump, which if you were to watch that, you would assume that war is on. He made the tired claims that Iran was the #1 state sponsor of terror. I would refer you to the discussion yesterday between Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Larry Johnson. You can find that on the schillerinstitute.com site. But in that, former CIA analyst and State Department official Larry Johnson actually uses State Department info or, statistics to show that that is indeed a lie. They are not the #1 state sponsor of terror. Others take the prize on that one. Now, the other thing that Trump referred to was the protesters killed, which was also addressed, 32,000 protesters that were killed. Helga Zepp-LaRouche and Larry Johnson also took this up, noting the economic statecraft of Scott Bessent of collapsing the economy in Iran and then using that as a pretext for the intelligence assets to come in and actually create the violence and so on. So now the other thing that Trump mentioned in the State of the Union was the ICBMs that will hit the developing ICBMs that will be capable of hitting the United States, as well as their taking up the pursuit of their nuclear weapons program, both of which have been refuted by our own intelligence agencies. But on the latter of the nuclear weapons, Trump said this thing that we're in negotiations, but we haven't heard these secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. Now, it's been pointed out that Abbas Araghchi, right before Trump gave the State of the Union, said, "Our fundamental convictions are crystal clear. Iran will under no circumstances ever develop a nuclear weapon." And on the eve of the Geneva talks today, or I believe they said it today, the president of Iran, Pezeshkian, also said the same thing, that we have repeatedly stated that we are not seeking a nuclear weapon. And that is on top of the fatwa, the religious decree issued in 2003 by Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. So anyway, this should be clear, but If it were left to that, there could perhaps be a way for Trump to pull out of the present war buildup and seemingly inevitable war, and allow for some deal to be worked out with Iran where they permanently renounce nuclear weapons, as they've done so many times. Now, Rubio has weighed in on this matter, adding to the discussion, which is supposed to be limited, that is between Witkoff and Aragchi. Perhaps others of the delegations will be there. But anyway, Rubio tried to expand it beyond the nuclear weapons program and bring in the ballistic missile program, saying that that had to be addressed, saying that these threaten our bases in the region, which of course we have bases all over the world, so anybody that has missiles is potentially threatening those bases. I digress. But so Rubio is saying that these conventional weapons, these things have to be addressed at the talks. We'll see what happens there. I won't say much on the other discussions that will be occurring in Geneva today, which is the U.S. delegation, Witkoff, and others meeting with the Ukrainian delegation, supposedly Rustem Umerov. I'll only just note that the coalition of the willing had met on the 4th, the commemoration of the start of the special military operation 4 years ago. And Keir Starmer again reiterated the tired mantra of "we're with you for as long as it takes," and so on. So we'll see again what happened. And as we know, many people just think that these are simply a ruse. These negotiations are a sham, and so on and so forth. But the world is changing, and the fact that these nations are talking is important. Now, back to the changes in the situation on the matter of the voices and propagandists within the military-industrial complex perhaps getting cold feet. I will just cite a couple of statements that follow up on the New York Times report that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, as well as CIA Chief John Ratcliffe were both saying that they didn't think it was going to be quite the cakewalk, that if Trump wanted to go in with a quick strike and get everything he wants and so on, then that might not quite work out that way. Now, adding to that voice, you had Chuck Schumer. I shouldn't say adding to that alleged voice, because of course Trump said that, this wasn't true. Dan Kane is ready to go, and said that in a Truth Social post. So anyway, but adding to at least the story that is ongoing regarding the cold feet, you have Chuck Schumer, perhaps more of a complaint, saying that that Trump's not being transparent. He said when you do these military operations in secret, it always causes longer wars, tragedy, more expenses, and mistakes. That coming from Chuck Schumer, who I don't recall him giving similar warnings on all the other wars that he has gone along with, the forever wars. Now, the other is from Max Boot. Max Boot is a notorious neocon from the Council on Foreign Relations. And what he says is, the military operation that Trump has threatened against Iran is potentially much larger and lengthier and thus much riskier than the kidnapping of Maduro, which I should hope would be obvious, but nonetheless, Max Boot says it publicly as we build up towards a potential strike against Iran. And then he goes on to cite how we failed to even take down the Houthis, or Houthis, however you pronounce that, in May of last year. And then he says the U.S. still could successfully strike targets in Iran, but it is far from clear that such attacks would bring major concessions from the regime, and then talks about that Trump shouldn't start a war without an obvious exit strategy. So that's from Max Boot, the Council on Foreign Relations. It followed up on what David Sanger, another journalist of the New York Times and so on, one of the, very close to the intelligence agencies, let's just put it that way, who complained that Trump didn't even try to make a case for war against Iran, even as Bush did, even though it was based on fraud and so on. That's basically what Sanger said. And then he went on to say, Trump is threatening another attack. He is doing so without providing assessments about the urgency of the threat or any explanation of why he needs to strike again after claiming the nuclear sites he targeted had been obliterated. So again, David Sanger from last week. But another voice is Politico, which I believe today said U.S. fears strike on Iran could carry political costs due to risks of casualties. So what's going on here? Is there a recognition that this won't be a cakewalk? We could potentially get mired into a much larger war. We could be embarrassed. There are credible reports that significant military, equipment is coming in from China and Russia, missiles, radars. I can't confirm any of that, but the point is that perhaps there would be significant embarrassment if the United States were to suffer a serious retaliation from Iran. The other thing that could be going on is that having lured Trump into a war with Iran and on the verge of its, starting, they're now pulling back and attempting to then throw this on Trump personally as a means to destroy his presidency and, frankly, to destroy the institution of the presidency. Recall that in Trump's first term, the UK ambassador to the United States, whose name is blanking on his name right now. This ambassador said that we needed to flood the zone and get Trump to go into a war with Iran, essentially to destroy the MAGA base, which is bigger than the MAGA per se. It's those Americans who voted for Trump to end the forever wars. And if that political dynamic could be broken by luring Trump into a strike on Iran in the first term, then this could destroy the political dynamic behind the presidency at that time. And I would argue, were there these games being played now, it's for the exact same reason. And I think Trump has a sense, or at least is being told by Tucker Carlson and many others within the base, that this will sink his presidency, and perhaps that is the intent. Again, not just to sink Trump's presidency, but to destroy the connection of the American people to the institution of the presidency. Now, the other discontinuity I'd like to cover is Merz's trip to China. This was significant. Representatives of the business industrial class of Germany, Volkswagen, BMW, I've heard Siemens was there. At one point, Merz discussed there's talk of a potential major deal with Airbus. That's a French company, but sort of a European conglomerate. Supposedly China is going to be ordering, I've heard, 120 planes. Anyway, Merz led this delegation. What Xi Jinping said in greeting the delegation yesterday is, he said, the more turbulent and intertwined the world becomes, the more China and Germany need to enhance strategic communication, increase strategic mutual trust, and promote the continuous new development of the all-around strategic partnership between the two countries. So, and then he said, Xi Jinping also said, the current international situation is undergoing the most profound transformation since the end of World War II. So that at least gives a sense of how China is thinking about it. We'll get more on this meeting, but what Helga Zepp-LaRouche said in an interview to CGTN, she is, of course, the head of the Schiller Institute and has run for Chancellor of Germany, and, of course, is well known in German political circles and so forth. But on CGTN, regarding this high-level delegation from Germany, she said, I'm for the first time really optimistic about the prospects of German-Chinese relations. Now, that's something coming from Helga, who has made clear that she's not been so optimistic about that, and including the former head of at least former top level of BlackRock leadership, Chancellor Merz, has not exactly been on board with the new paradigm, shall we say. But Helga Zepp-LaRouche had other things to say concerning specifics on German-Chinese cooperation around certain technologies, around particularly around the car industry and so on. But I think she importantly identified the deep cultural and philosophical traditions in both of the nations, and that this could be the basis for joining hands as once proposed by Wilhelm Gottfried Leibniz, who referred to, I won't cover it in depth, but he referred to the importance of the Confucian tradition on one side of the Eurasian landmass and the philosophical traditions of Europe, and that it was important that those two hands could join at some point. That's what Leibniz got into. But she said that this could completely transform the world situation. She said they can do joint ventures, that is, Germany and China, could do joint ventures to help in the development of the global South. They can work with the global majority. And then she went on to note that these are the two nations that have had the economic miracles, Germany in the post-World War period, as well as what China is doing in the recent period. And she said, if these two countries combine their experience, I really think there is a great future ahead. So again, the cold feet on Iran, the question of Germany and potential relations with China, these are things that we can use to shift the situation and get beyond the geopolitical games. Even if there's some that think that maybe Germany and the Europeans could pull China away from Russia and deal with their economic crisis immediately so that they can get money to fund the Ukraine and the war against Russia. These things are not going to work because the industrial capabilities has been decimated, and the war games, whether it be against Iran and Ukraine, are just not feasible in conventional terms. We, of course, had the the Russian foreign intelligence warning that I mentioned yesterday about the potential that the British and the French would pursue getting a nuclear weapon into Ukraine. Other than that last-ditch desperate effort, we can't keep these wars going on any longer in conventional terms. So perhaps there is a recognition of this, and that the suicide pact that Germany's been under, allowing Nord Stream to be blown up and their industrial capabilities to collapse, as well as this ongoing support for Ukraine, has destroyed the German economy. And perhaps some of these industrial leaders are saying, we're done, let's get on with the business of collaboration on the Eurasian continent. I would only just add that the German Friedrich List, who eventually became a refugee to the United States, but he was, of course, one of the leading proponents of the American system. I would hope that the German delegation would be reading List in China, because according to certain reports, List has far overtaken the Adam Smith as the most prominent European economist studied in China. So the other thing that I think should be noted is that as the German delegation was in their hotel room watching CGTN, I'm sure I would love to see the reaction on their face watching Helga Zepp-LaRouche lay out what the potential of German-U.S. collaboration could be. But the point is that if the U.S., if Germany, if Europe were to move on the American system and work to collaborate with Russia, with China, this is the way out of the war dynamic. This is the way out of the grip of the Epstein class and their privatized imperial system. And that is what we need to organize. So we're not observers watching these things. We are looking at observing these things for the point of an intervention, and that has to be our intervention. That's certainly how Diane Sayre has taken up her presidential campaign, and in line with what Jose Vega is doing with his congressional campaign. They're out intervening to shape the dialogue, to shape the policy. So I would only say to join the International Peace Coalition meeting tomorrow, as well as the roundtable discussion or panel discussion that will be happening on March 2nd. So sign up for those. You can find the invitations on the LaRouche organization, and otherwise stay tuned.